The shuttle docked with a heavy clang that shook the walls. Corporal Elias Morrow grabbed his bag, stood up, and walked through the airlock into the largest warship he had ever seen. The iron veil stretched out before him like a small city made of dark metal. Its corridors were wide enough for 3 trucks to drive side by side, and the ceiling rose high above his head, built to fit species much larger than any human. The air smelled strange, filtered and recycled 1,000 times over, carrying faint traces of chemicals he could not name. Lights along the walls shifted between blue and white, adjusting automatically as different species walked past. And there were so many species. A group of Drailkin soldiers marched by, each one standing over 7 feet tall, their bodies covered in thick plates of natural bone armor that looked like gray stone. Their footsteps made the floor vibrate. Behind them came a pair of Scythrani, long serpentine creatures that moved on powerful coiled tails, their scales shimmering green and black, their mouths hiding fangs that dripped with venom. A Veilshi medic floated past on 4 thin legs, its enormous round eyes blinking slowly as it studied a data screen held in one of its 6 delicate hands. Elias stood still for a moment and watched them all. None of them looked at him. He was just another body in the corridor, and a small one at that. He made his way to the intake processing center, where a bored-looking alien behind a desk scanned his transfer documents. The alien was a Korth, short, round, with gray skin, and 4 arms that moved independently of each other. 2 arms typed on a console, while a third held a drink, and a 4th scratched the side of its wide head. "Human," the Korth said, reading the screen. It did not say the word with hostility. It said it the way someone might say broken or empty. Just a fact. Just something that was less than everything else around it. "Corporal Elias Morrow," Elias said, "reporting for assignment." The Korth tapped a few more keys. "You are assigned to Fire Team Korath. Sub-Commander Thyrak is your team leader. Deck 14, Section 7. It paused and looked up at Elias with flat, uninterested eyes. "You are the first human on this ship. Try not to get stepped on." Elias picked up his bag and walked away without a word. He found Deck 14 after 20 minutes of navigating corridors that all looked the same. Section 7 was a training bay connected to a set of shared crew quarters. The door was open, and voices came from inside, deep, rumbling voices that sounded like rocks grinding together. Elias stepped through the door and found himself standing in front of his new team. 3 Drailkin warriors sat on reinforced benches, cleaning their weapons. A Scythrani was coiled in the corner, sharpening a curved blade against its own scales, and standing in the center of the room, arms crossed over a chest as wide as a small wall, was the biggest Drailkin Elias had ever seen. Sub-Commander Thyrak looked down at Elias the way a mountain might look down at a pebble. His bone plates were darker than the others, scarred and cracked from years of combat, and his eyes were small and deep-set beneath a heavy ridge of natural armor. When he spoke, his voice was so low that Elias felt it in his chest. "You are the human." "Yes, sir," Elias said. Thyrak stared at him for a long time. Then he made a sound, a slow, grinding exhale that Elias recognized as Drailkin laughter. "I requested a combat specialist," Thyrak said. "They sent me a species with no armor, no claws, no venom, no redundant organs." "Kesra, what is the Coalition Combat Index rating for humans?" The Scythrani looked up, her yellow eyes sliding over Elias, like he was something she might eat later. "Tier 9, she said. "Lowest classification, equivalent threat level to most herbivorous livestock species." The 3 Drailkin soldiers laughed. The sound filled the room like thunder. Thyrak held up a thick hand, and the laughter stopped. He looked at Elias again, and this time there was something almost like pity in his expression. "I will not put you in a position where you will die uselessly. You are assigned to logistics and supply management. You will inventory our equipment, manage ammunition counts, and ensure our gear is maintained. You will not participate in combat operations. Is that understood? Elias looked at Thyrak. He looked at Kesra. He looked at the 3 Draelkin soldiers, who were still grinning at him, with mouths full of teeth the size of his fingers. Understood, sir, Elias said quietly. He was given a small bunk in the corner of the quarters, the only one low enough for him to climb into without a ladder. He unpacked his bag, stored his gear, and sat on the edge of his bed in silence. No one spoke to him for the rest of the day. But Elias did not waste his time. He watched. He listened. He noticed that the Draelkin were strong, but slow to change direction once they started moving. He noticed that Kesra was fast, incredibly fast, but she always struck from the same angle, low and to the left, leading with her fangs. He noticed that the team relied on brute force for every problem. Push harder, hit harder, move faster. There was no creativity in how they fought, no adaptation. He began keeping notes on a small data pad. Species, strengths, weaknesses, movement patterns, blind spots. He wrote down everything. Days passed. Elias did his job. He counted ammunition, cleaned weapons, organized supply crates. He did it well and without complaint. The team ignored him. He was furniture. He was background noise. Then one evening, the ship's communication system crackled to life. The captain's voice filled every corridor on the Iron Veil. Attention all personnel. We have received deployment orders. The Iron Veil is moving to the Vareth contested sector. All combat personnel must complete Combined Arms Combat Certification before arrival. No exceptions. Certification begins in 48 hours. The room went quiet. Thyrak looked at Elias. Kesra looked at Elias. The 3 Draelkin soldiers looked at Elias. No exceptions, Thyrak repeated slowly. He shook his massive head. The human will not survive certification. Elias said nothing. He put down the ammunition crate he was holding, sat on his bunk, and began reviewing his notes. He had 48 hours to prepare. That was more than enough. The combat simulation deck was the largest open space on the Iron Veil. It sat deep in the belly of the ship, a vast arena that could reshape itself into any environment. Urban ruins, dense forests, open desert, even zero gravity. The walls were lined with observation platforms where off-duty crew gathered to watch the certification trials. Today, every platform was full. Word had spread. The human was going to fight. Elias stood at the edge of the arena floor in standard coalition combat gear. It was the smallest size available, and it still hung loose on his frame. He had tightened the straps as much as he could, and taped down the parts that moved too much. Around him, other fire teams were stretching and preparing. Draelkin warriors slammed their fists together, making sounds like hammers hitting anvils. Sithrani fighters hissed and coiled their bodies tight. A group of Veilshi soldiers clicked their long limbs in a rhythm that passed for a war chant. Elias stretched his legs, rolled his shoulders, and took slow, even breaths. He did not look at the crowd above. He did not look at his teammates, who stood nearby with expressions that ranged from pity to embarrassment. Thyrak walked over and stood beside him. The Draelkin's shadow covered Elias completely. The certification has 3 stages, Thyrak said. Hand-to-hand combat, tactical scenario, endurance trial. If you fail any stage, you are removed from active duty. I know, Elias said. Thyrak looked down at him. If you are injured badly, signal for medical extraction. There is no shame in it. I know, Elias said again. Thyrak grunted and walked away. The horn sounded. Certification had begun. The first stage was hand-to-hand combat. Each fighter was randomly paired with an opponent from a different fire team. The rules were simple. Fight until one opponent could not continue or signaled surrender. No weapons. No killing. Elias looked at the screen above the arena as names and matchups appeared. His opponent was listed beside his name. Kesra, standing nearby, let out a sharp hiss of amusement. You have been matched against a Sithrani, Ral of Fireteam Desik. She tilted her head, her yellow eyes bright with something between amusement and curiosity. Ral is fast. She will finish you in seconds. Try not to bleed on the floor too much. It is difficult to clean. Elias walked to the center of the combat ring and faced his opponent. Ral was slightly smaller than Kesra, but her scales were darker, and she moved with a tight, controlled energy that told Elias she had fought many times before. Her fangs were visible, even with her mouth closed, curving down over her lower jaw like two white hooks. The signal sounded. Ral struck immediately. She launched forward with blinding speed, her body uncoiling like a spring, her fangs aimed at Elias's neck. It was the classic Sithrani attack, low and fast, designed to inject venom and end the fight before it truly began. Elias did not try to block her. He did not try to match her speed. He simply was not where she expected him to be. He stepped to the right, just one step, timed precisely, and let Ral strike pass through empty air. Her momentum carried her forward, and for a fraction of a second, she was off balance. That was all he needed. Elias grabbed the back of her neck, where the scales were thinnest, and twisted his body, using her own speed against her. He drove his knee into the nerve cluster beneath her jaw, a spot he had identified weeks ago while watching Kesra train. Ral's entire body locked up, her muscles seized. She crashed to the ground, twitching, unable to move. The arena went silent. Ral tried to rise, failed, and slapped the ground with her tail, the Sithrani signal for surrender. The silence lasted for 3 full seconds before the murmuring began. It rolled through the observation platforms like a wave, hundreds of alien voices trying to make sense of what they had just seen. Thyrak stood with his arms still crossed. His expression had not changed, but his eyes had narrowed. Elias returned to his team without speaking. The second stage was the tactical scenario. Each fire team was placed inside a simulated environment. This time, a destroyed urban landscape, and had to navigate through an ambush by adaptive combat drones. The drones learned from each encounter, becoming harder to defeat with repeated tactics. Thyrak did what Drillkin always did. He ordered a direct charge. The team moved forward in a tight formation, smashing through the first wave of drones with raw strength. But the drones adapted. They retreated and regrouped. They targeted the gaps between the Drillkin's bone plates. The advance stalled. Thyrak roared in frustration. They keep changing. That is the point, Elias said from behind him. Every head turned. Elias spoke calmly, as though he were describing the weather. The drones adapt to direct attacks, so we stop being direct. He pointed to a collapsed building on the left. Kesra, go through that structure. Circle behind them. Do not attack until I signal. Thyrak, take 2 soldiers and push forward slowly. Make noise. Draw their attention. I need them looking at you. He picked up a piece of broken metal from the ground. I will handle the rest. Thyrak stared at him. For a moment it seemed like he would refuse. Then, slowly, he nodded. They moved. Thyrak and 2 Drillkin marched forward, making themselves loud and obvious. The drones focused on them, grouping together to meet the threat. Kesra slithered silently through the ruined building, invisible in the shadows. Elias, meanwhile, worked fast. He rigged 3 improvised traps from debris, a falling wall panel triggered by a tripwire, a stack of metal crates balanced to collapse into a narrow passage, and a crude noisemaker designed to draw a group of drones into a dead-end corridor. One by one, the traps triggered. Drones were crushed, trapped, and confused. When the remaining drones turned to deal with the new threats, Kesra struck from behind, cutting them apart before they could adapt again. The scenario ended. Fireteam Korath completed the course faster than any other team. The third stage was endurance. It was simple. Run. Keep running. The simulation deck generated an endless corridor that shifted in difficulty, sometimes flat, sometimes steep, sometimes filled with obstacles. The temperature fluctuated from freezing to burning. The air thinned, then thickened. Fighters dropped out one by one as their bodies gave up. The Draelkin lasted longer than most. Their heavy bodies were built for power, and they pushed through the first hour with brute determination. But heat built up inside their bone armor, and one by one they slowed, stumbled, and stopped. The Sithrani were fast, but cold-blooded. When the temperature dropped, their muscles locked, and their speed vanished. The Veilshi collapsed when the air thinned. Their massive lungs needed rich, dense atmosphere. Elias ran. He was not the fastest, he was not the strongest, he was not the most graceful, but he did not stop. His body burned, his lungs ached, his legs screamed for rest, and he simply continued. One foot in front of the other, again and again. Aliens watching from the platforms could not understand what they were seeing. Species after species fell away, and the small, soft, unarmored human kept moving. It was not impressive to watch. There was no power in it, no beauty, no display of biological superiority. It was just a creature that refused to stop. 2 hours in, only 4 runners remained. Elias was one of them. 3 hours in, only 2 remained. Elias was still one of them. The last competitor, a massive 4-legged tauren built like a tank, collapsed at the 3-hour and 20-minute mark. Elias kept running for another 4 minutes before the simulation ended and the system declared the stage complete. He walked off the course on shaking legs, sweat pouring down his face, and sat down on the nearest bench. He drank water. He said nothing. The final scores appeared on the screens above the arena. Fireteam Korath had the second highest composite score on the entire ship. Elias's individual score was in the top 5% of all personnel. The arena was quiet for a long time. Thyrak walked over and stood in front of Elias. He looked down at the human for a very long time, and something shifted behind his deep-set eyes. Something that had not been there before. "What are you?" Thyrak asked quietly. Elias looked up at him, still breathing hard, still dripping with sweat, still shaking from exhaustion. "Just a human," he said. From the observation platform above, a young Veilshi officer turned to the crew member beside her and whispered the question that was now on the mind of every single person aboard the Iron Veil. What exactly is a human? Nobody had a good answer. In the days that followed the certification trials, something changed aboard the Iron Veil. It was not a loud change. There were no announcements or meetings about it. It was a quiet shift, like the way air pressure changes before a storm. Invisible, but felt by everyone. People were watching Elias Morrow, not with the careless dismissal of before, not with the open amusement that a Tier 9 species usually received. They watched him the way prey watches a predator it does not yet understand, with careful, nervous attention. Elias noticed the watching, but he said nothing about it. He continued his routines. He woke early, exercised alone in the small space beside his bunk, ate in the mess hall, and reported for duty. He was still quiet, still polite, still the smallest person in every room he entered. But now, when he walked through the corridors, other species stepped aside. Someone on the observation platform during certification had recorded Elias's fights and posted them on the ship's internal network. Within hours, the videos had been viewed by most of the crew. Within a day, Comments and discussions had exploded across every channel. And within 2 days, crew members had begun looking up the one thing nobody had bothered to research before: Earth. The planet was listed in the Coalition's Species and Worlds database under the file designation SOL3. The entry was short, dry, and clinical. It had been written 20 years ago during First Contact and never updated, because nobody had considered humans important enough to study further. But now, crew members across the Iron Veil were reading that entry with very different eyes. SOL3 was classified as a Class 7 environment. The Coalition's environmental classification system went from Class 1, which was calm and stable, to Class 10, which was considered fundamentally incompatible with life. A Class 7 world was officially described as hostile, volatile, and not recommended for habitation by any known sapient species. The details were worse than the classification. Earth's axial tilt created extreme seasonal temperature shifts across most of its surface, ranging from 50 degrees below zero to 50 degrees above. Its tectonic plates were active, producing earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis with no predictable schedule. Its atmosphere was dangerously rich in oxygen, a highly reactive gas that corroded metal, fueled uncontrollable fires, and slowly poisoned most galactic species with prolonged exposure. The planet's water, which covered 70% of its surface, was filled with salt, making it undrinkable, and its oceans contained predatory creatures ranging in size from microscopic parasites to animals the length of starships. And then there was the wildlife. Earth had produced an extraordinary number of predators in every environment: land, sea, air, and even underground. Venomous insects, pack-hunting mammals, ambush predators that could remain motionless for hours before striking, parasites that burrowed into living hosts and ate them from the inside, creatures that used electricity, poison, camouflage, and even biological acids as weapons. A Drelkin weapons officer named Morek read the file in the mess hall and set down his food. He had lost his appetite. Their planet tried to kill them every single day, he said to the soldier across from him, and they survived for hundreds of thousands of years, without armor, without venom, without any natural weapons at all. His companions stared at the screen. How? Morek shook his head. It says they used tools, rocks and sticks at first, then metal, then fire, then machines. He scrolled further and his expression changed. They did not just survive their predators, they hunted them. They hunted everything. It says here that their ancient method of hunting was to chase prey on foot until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. They would follow an animal for hours, sometimes days, never stopping, never resting, until the animal's body simply gave out. The soldier across from him put down his food too. The research spread through the ship like a disease. Every new fact made things worse. Humans could survive injuries that would kill most species. They could function with broken bones. They could lose significant amounts of blood and remain conscious. Their immune systems were so aggressive that their own bodies sometimes attacked themselves by mistake. They healed from wounds that other species could not, growing new skin, reconnecting torn muscles, even regrowing portions of their liver. They could eat foods that were poisonous to nearly every other species in the Coalition. Capsaicin, a chemical weapon produced by earth plants to prevent consumption, was something humans ate for pleasure. They consumed ethanol, a toxic solvent, as a recreational drink. They kept some of Earth's most dangerous predators as pets, and had formed emotional bonds with them over thousands of years. And perhaps the most disturbing fact of all, the fact that quietly terrified everyone who learned it, was this: Elias Morrow was not special. He had no genetic enhancements, no cybernetic modifications, no advanced training beyond standard military education. By human standards, he was completely, utterly average. If an average human could do what Elias had done during certification, What could an exceptional one do? Nobody wanted to think about that. Sub-Commander Thyrak thought about it anyway. He sat alone in his quarters for a long time, reviewing the certification footage again and again. He watched the way Elias had moved, not with the heavy confidence of a Draelkin or the liquid speed of a Sithrani, but with something else, something Thyrak did not have a word for. It was as if Elias was constantly reading the world around him, processing every detail, and making decisions faster than his body could execute them. It was not instinct, it was not training, it was adaptation in real time. Thyrak had been a soldier for 30 years. He had led teams against pirates, insurgents, and Nexari raiders. He had fought in environments that would kill most species in minutes, but he had always fought the same way. The Draelkin way. Strength, armor, endurance. Push forward. Hit hard, take the damage, and keep going. Elias fought like water. He went around obstacles, instead of through them. He used his enemy's strength against them. He changed his approach for every situation, every opponent, every moment, and he did it all with a body that had no natural protection whatsoever. Thyrak stood up, left his quarters, and found Elias in the supply bay, organizing equipment. "Human," Thyrak said. Elias looked up. "Sir." Thyrak stood in silence for a moment, and what he did next cost him more pride than any battle wound he had ever received. "I want you to restructure our combat drills. Teach the team to fight the way you fight." Elias set down the crate he was holding. He studied Thyrak's face, the hard jaw, the scarred bone plates, the deep-set eyes that had never once looked at him with anything but dismissal. "Until now. Human training methods are uncomfortable," Elias said carefully. "They require you to accept that strength is not always the answer. That sometimes the best move is to run, to hide, to wait. Most species find that difficult." "I am not most species," Thyrak said. Elias nodded slowly. "Then we start tomorrow." Thyrak turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing. Liaison Officer Vea asked me to tell you she wishes to speak with you. She is in the observation lounge on Deck 6. Elias found Vea an hour later. She was sitting by one of the great curved windows that looked out into the black emptiness of space. She was a Kalinari, tall and thin, with smooth pale skin that seemed to glow faintly from within, and large dark eyes that reflected the starlight. The Kalinari were an empathic species. They could feel the emotions of those around them, the way other species felt heat or cold. She smiled when Elias sat down, across from her. "You have frightened the entire ship, Corporal." "I did not mean to," Elias said. "I know." She tilted her head, studying him. "I have wanted to tell you something since the day you arrived. When you first boarded this ship, everyone around you felt nothing when they looked at you. Boredom, dismissal, pity. But I felt something different, something underneath your calm." Elias waited. "There is a fire inside you," Vea said softly. "A deep, controlled aggression that you keep locked away behind walls of discipline and patience. I have never felt anything like it. It is not anger. It is not violence. It is something older than both of those things. It is the will to survive, and it is always burning." Elias was quiet for a long time. Then he looked out the window at the stars and said, "Every human has it. We just learn to keep it quiet." Before either of them could speak again, the ship's alarm cut through the silence. A sharp, repeating tone that meant only one thing. Emergency distress signal received. Elias and Vea looked at each other. Then Elias stood, and without a word, he walked toward Deck 14. The fire behind his eyes was no longer quiet. The briefing room was packed. Every fire team leader on the Iron Veil stood shoulder to shoulder around the central holographic display, which projected a slowly rotating image of a small green moon covered in thick jungle. The moon was called Verath 3, and somewhere beneath its canopy, people were dying. The captain, an ancient Veilshi with a body like a tall, thin insect, and eyes that had seen 100 campaigns, spoke in a voice that clicked and hummed. 36 hours ago, Coalition Outpost Verath received a priority distress signal. The outpost has been overrun by Nexari Dominion raiders. We estimate 200 or more enemy combatants on the ground. Communication with the outpost was lost shortly after the initial signal. We do not know how many survivors remain. The holographic image zoomed in, showing the outpost, a cluster of buildings carved into a hillside, surrounded on all sides by dense alien jungle. Red markers showed estimated Nexari positions. There were a lot of red markers. Reinforcements from the Second Fleet are 4 days away, the captain continued. Our orders are to hold position and wait. The room was silent. Everyone understood what that meant. 4 days was too long. The Nexari did not take prisoners. If there were survivors in that outpost, they would not be alive in 4 days. Thyrak shifted his weight. His bone plates scraped against each other with a sound like grinding stone. He looked at Elias, who stood at the back of the room, arms folded, staring at the holographic map with an expression that Thyrak had learned to recognize. The expression of a human who was thinking. After the briefing ended, Thyrak pulled Elias aside in the corridor. You have a plan, Thyrak said. It was not a question. I have an idea, Elias said. It is not the same thing. Tell me. A full assault against 200 Nexari in a fortified position inside dense jungle is suicide. The captain is right to wait for reinforcements from a tactical perspective. But from a human perspective, waiting means those people die. He paused. I want to go in with a small team. Not to fight the Nexari army. Just to reach the survivors and get them out. Thyrak's jaw tightened. A small team. Against 200. We do not need to beat them. We just need to confuse them long enough to move through them. Hit them in places they do not expect. Make them think they are surrounded. Make them afraid. Elias held Thyrak's gaze. I know what the Nexari are. Hive-coordinated insectoids. They share tactical information in real time across their entire group. That sounds like an advantage, but it is also a weakness. If you can feed false information into the hive, make one group panic, and that panic spreads to all of them, the entire force becomes disorganized. Thyrak was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I will go with you, and so will the rest of Fireteam Korath. The captain refused the plan 3 times before Thyrak talked her into allowing it. The compromise was strict. Fireteam Korath would have exactly 6 hours from insertion to extraction. If they were not back at the landing zone in 6 hours, the Iron Veil would leave orbit and wait for reinforcements. There would be no rescue for the rescue team. Elias accepted the terms without hesitation. They dropped onto Verath 3 in a stealth shuttle, landing 2 kilometers from the outpost in a small clearing choked with thick purple vegetation. The jungle of Verath 3 was nothing like any forest on Earth. The trees were massive, hundreds of feet tall, with trunks as wide as buildings. Their bark dark red and covered in bioluminescent moss that pulsed with faint green light. The air was thick, hot, and tasted like metal. Strange sounds echoed through the canopy. Clicks, hums, and distant screams that could have been animals or could have been something worse. Elias checked his filter mask, adjusted his weapon, and looked at his team. Thyrak stood like a wall of bone and muscle, his massive rifle looking almost normal-sized in his hands. Kesra coiled beside him, her scales dark enough to blend perfectly with the shadows. The 3 Draelkin soldiers, Morek, Hagen, and Voss, stood ready, their faces hard with determination. Rules, Elias said quietly. We do not engage unless we must. We move fast, we move quiet. If we are spotted, we do not fight. We disappear and reposition. The Nexari are pack hunters. They swarm targets they can see. If they cannot see us, they cannot swarm us. Thyrak nodded. You lead, we follow. They moved into the jungle. Elias led them on a path that no military textbook would have recommended. He did not take the direct route. He circled wide, moving through the densest parts of the undergrowth, where the massive root systems of the alien trees created natural tunnels and hiding spots. He stopped frequently, listening, watching, testing the air. Twice he changed direction entirely when he noticed subtle signs: broken branches, disturbed soil, the faint chemical smell that Nexari left behind. They reached the outpost perimeter in 40 minutes. Through the vegetation, they could see the Nexari patrols, tall insectoid creatures with 4 arms, dark chitin armor that grew from their own bodies, and compound eyes that glowed a dull orange in the dim light. They moved in groups of 6, communicating through rapid clicks and chemical signals, always aware of each other's positions. Elias studied them for 10 minutes. Then he turned to his team and spoke in a whisper. There are 4 patrol routes. They overlap, which means there is never a gap longer than 90 seconds. But they are creatures of pattern. They do the same thing every time. That is their weakness. He laid out his plan. It was unlike anything his team had ever heard. First, he had Morik and Hagen plant charges made from scavenged outpost debris at 3 points around the perimeter. Not to kill Nexari, to make noise, to create the illusion of multiple attacking forces coming from different directions. Second, he sent Kesra, the fastest and quietest member of the team, on a wide circle to the far side of the outpost with a set of sound emitters. Her job was to activate them at precise intervals, creating the sound of weapons fire and movement in locations where no one existed. Third, he had Tyrak and Voss take position at the main approach, visible and loud, ready to draw attention when the time came. Elias himself would go in alone through a drainage tunnel he had spotted beneath the outpost's eastern wall. He would find the survivors and bring them to the extraction point. Tyrak did not like the idea of Elias going alone. He said so. Elias said he understood, and then he went anyway. The charges blew. 3 explosions ripped through the jungle on 3 sides of the outpost, each one far from the others. The Nexari reacted exactly as Elias had predicted. The hive mind registered multiple simultaneous threats and split its forces to respond to all of them. Patrol groups scattered, racing toward explosions that had already ended, finding nothing. Then Kesra's sound emitters activated. Weapons fire echoed from the far side of the outpost. The Nexari pivoted again, sending reinforcements toward a battle that did not exist. Then Tyrak stepped out of the jungle and roared. It was not a battle cry. It was a challenge, a deep, earth-shaking sound that every Nexari within half a kilometer could hear. He fired his weapon into the nearest group of raiders, Voss at his side, and the 2 Draelkin warriors created a wall of noise and violence that pulled every available Nexari toward them like a magnet. Meanwhile, Elias crawled through the drainage tunnel, emerged inside the outpost, and moved through the damaged corridors like a ghost. He found the survivors, 11 of them, mostly wounded, hiding in a sealed storage room beneath the command center. They stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. A human. They had never seen one in person. I am Corporal Elias Morrow, he said. Follow me and stay quiet. We are leaving. He led them back through the tunnel, through the jungle, along a route he had memorized during their approach. Behind them, the sounds of chaos continued. Explosions, weapons fire, Tyrak's roaring, Kesra's phantom battles. The Nexari were chasing shadows in every direction. They reached the extraction point. The shuttle was waiting. Kesra arrived first, silent and fast. Then Morik and Hagen. Then Tyrak and Voss, falling back through the jungle, still firing. Elias counted heads. Everyone was there, except the path behind Tyrak was not clear. An Nexari heavy unit had tracked them. A group of 20 raiders, led by a massive command-cast Nexari twice the size of the others, was crashing through the jungle toward the landing zone. They would arrive in minutes. The shuttle needed 3 minutes to power up. Elias looked at the jungle behind them. He looked at the shuttle. He looked at the 11 survivors being loaded aboard. Then he picked up his weapon, turned to Thyrak, and said 5 words. "Get them on the shuttle." Thyrak grabbed his arm. "You cannot hold them alone." Elias smiled. It was a small, tired, honest smile. "This is what we were built for." He turned and walked back toward the jungle. Behind him, Thyrak watched him go with something in his eyes that had never been there before. It was respect. The corridor was 30 feet long and 8 feet wide. It was the only path between the jungle and the landing zone. A narrow passage cut through a ridge of solid rock, with high walls on both sides and no way around. Elias had noticed it on the way in. He had memorized it without knowing why. Now he understood. Some part of him, the old part, the part that had been hunting and fighting and surviving for 200,000 years, had looked at that corridor and thought, "This is where I will make my stand." He worked fast. Every second mattered. He dragged a fallen section of metal wall plating across the corridor's mouth and wedged it between the rock walls at an angle. It would not stop the Nexari, but it would slow them, force them to climb over it 1 or 2 at a time instead of rushing through in a wave. Behind the barricade, he stacked broken equipment crates to create cover he could crouch behind. He pulled 2 disabled Nexari scout drones from the wreckage nearby, small round machines the size of his head, and cracked them open. Their power cells were still charged. He rigged them with loose wiring, turning them into crude explosive devices, and placed one on each side of the corridor entrance, buried under debris. He had 4 magazines for his rifle, a combat knife on his belt, 2 concussion grenades he had taken from the supply crates before deployment, and his body, which was tired and sore and running on nothing but water and willpower. It would have to be enough. He heard them before he saw them. The clicking, hundreds of sharp, rapid clicks bouncing off the rock walls, growing louder with every second. The Nexari communicated through those clicks, sharing position data, threat assessments, and attack patterns across the entire group in real time. 20 raiders moved as one organism, each one knowing exactly where the others were and what they were doing. The first Nexari appeared at the far end of the corridor. It was a scout, lean, fast, with 4 arms and compound eyes that glowed orange in the dim jungle light. It saw the barricade. It clicked rapidly, transmitting the information to the rest of the group. More appeared behind it, then more. They filled the far end of the corridor like dark water rising in a pipe, their chitin armor scratching against the rock walls as they pressed forward. The command-cast Nexari stood at the back, enormous, its head nearly touching the top of the corridor, its 4 arms each holding a different weapon. It clicked once, a deep bass sound, and the scouts surged forward. Elias waited. The first wave hit the barricade and began climbing over it. 2 scouts came over the top at the same time, their 4 arms pulling them up and over with insect speed. Elias detonated the first drone. The explosion was not large, but in the confined space of the corridor, it did not need to be. The blast ripped through the 2 scouts and threw debris backward into the group behind them. The clicking became frantic. Pain signals, confusion, damage reports all transmitted simultaneously. The hive mind stuttered. Elias fired from behind his cover. Short, controlled bursts. He did not aim for center mass. Nexari chitin armor was thick across the chest and back. He aimed for joints, knees, elbows, the thin gaps where arms met torso. Every shot was placed with the patience of a man who had spent weeks studying exactly where these creatures were weakest. 3 more Nexari fell. The rest pulled back behind the barricade, regrouping. Elias used the pause to shift position. He moved to the other side of the corridor, changing his angle. When the Nexari came over the barricade again, they aimed where he had been. He was not there. He fired again. 2 more dropped. The command-cast Nexari clicked a new order. The raiders changed tactics. Instead of climbing the barricade, they began tearing it apart, using their combined strength to rip the metal plating away, piece by piece. It would take them less than a minute. Elias threw his first concussion grenade. It bounced off the barricade and detonated in the middle of the group. The shockwave was disorienting, designed to scramble senses and balance rather than kill. The Nexari stumbled, their clicking dissolving into static for a few precious seconds. Elias stood up and fired the rest of his second magazine into the confused mass. He dropped back behind cover as return fire scorched the air above his head, melting the rock wall behind him. 2 magazines left. The barricade came apart. The Nexari poured through the gap, and the corridor became a nightmare. Elias detonated the second drone as the first wave passed over it. The explosion caught 3 raiders and sent chitin fragments flying like shrapnel. But the rest kept coming. Elias fell back, firing as he moved. A razor-sharp limb slashed across his left shoulder, cutting through his armor and into the muscle beneath. The pain was immediate and enormous, white-hot, like someone had pressed a heated blade against his skin. He could feel blood running down his arm, warm and fast. He kept firing. An Nexari scout lunged at him from the side. Elias dropped his rifle, pulled his combat knife, and drove it into the gap between the scout's head and thorax. The creature collapsed. Elias picked up his rifle, switched to his third magazine, and continued falling back. Another hit, this time a glancing blow to his ribs from a Nexari weapon. He felt something crack. The pain made his vision blur for a moment, and he stumbled. A click of excited energy rippled through the Nexari group. They sensed weakness. They surged forward. Elias threw his last concussion grenade, not at the Nexari, but at the ground in front of his own feet. The blast hit him too. The shockwave rattled his skull and made his ears ring. But it hit the charging Nexari worse. They were closer, more exposed, and their compound eyes were more sensitive to the flash. The front line crumpled. Elias pressed his back against the corridor wall, breathing in short, ragged gasps. His left arm was wet with blood. His ribs screamed with every breath. His ears were ringing so loudly he could barely hear the clicking. He looked down at his hands and saw they were shaking. He was afraid. He had been afraid since the moment he walked into this corridor. His heart was hammering against his broken ribs like it wanted to escape his body. Every instinct told him to run, to hide, to save himself. He stayed. He raised his rifle with trembling hands, aimed at the next Nexari coming through the smoke, and fired. Last magazine. He made every shot count. Joints, gaps, weak points. He moved constantly, never staying in one place for more than a few seconds, forcing the Nexari to readjust with every attack. The corridor was filled with smoke and dust and the smell of burned chitin and human blood, and somewhere in the middle of it all, a single human was still standing. The clicking changed. For the first time, a new signal passed through the Nexari hive mind. A signal that Elias could not hear, but could feel in the way they moved. They hesitated. They slowed. Their compound eyes tracked him with something that looked very much like uncertainty. The Nexari were afraid. They had fought Draelkin warriors and Sithrani assassins and Veilshi sharpshooters. They understood those enemies. But this creature, this small, bleeding, broken thing that refused to stop, did not fit any pattern in their collective memory. It should have been dead. It should have run. It did neither. Elias's rifle clicked empty. He dropped it, pulled his knife, and stood in the center of the corridor, bleeding from a dozen wounds, one arm barely functional, ribs cracked, ears ringing. He raised the knife and waited. The Nexari stared at him. And then the sound came. Not from in front of him, but from behind. A deep, thundering roar that shook dust from the walls. Thyrak came around the corner at a full charge, his bone-plated body filling the corridor from wall to wall, Morek and Hagen right behind him. The Drelkin hit the remaining Nexari like a landslide hitting a village. It was over in seconds. Thyrak grabbed Elias before he fell. The human was barely conscious, his body finally surrendering to the damage it had endured. Thyrak carried him out of the corridor, through the jungle, and onto the shuttle as though he weighed nothing at all. The shuttle lifted off. The Iron Veil collected them from orbit. The mission was complete. Elias woke in the medbay 2 days later. The Veilshi doctor standing over him was staring at a screen full of biological data with an expression of total disbelief. "Your body is already repairing itself," the doctor said, all 6 hands gesturing at different readings simultaneously. "The muscle tissue in your shoulder is regenerating. Your ribs are fusing. Your blood volume has nearly restored itself." The doctor looked at Elias with its enormous round eyes. "I have treated soldiers from 47 species. I have never seen a biological system this aggressively committed to keeping itself alive." Later that day, the doctor filed an official request to the Coalition Species Classification Board. The entry for humans, SOL3, sapient species, was updated for the first time in 20 years. The old classification read, Tier 9, minimal threat, no natural weapons or defenses, recommend non-combat roles. The new classification read, Tier 2, apex adaptive predator, extreme threat in all environments, remarkable endurance, pain tolerance, and regenerative capability, highly creative and unpredictable combat behavior. Do not engage without overwhelming numerical and tactical superiority. Do not assume surrender or incapacitation. Reclassification approved unanimously. Thyrak visited Elias in the medbay that evening. The Draelkin stood beside the bed for a long time without speaking. Then, slowly, he raised his right fist and pressed it against the center of his chest, over the thickest plate of bone armor that covered his heart. It was the Draelkin warrior's salute, the highest mark of respect one fighter could give another. It had never, in the recorded history of the Draelkin people, been given to a non-Draelkin. Elias raised his own fist, the one that still worked, and returned the gesture. Neither of them said a word. Neither of them needed to. Vea came last. She sat beside his bed in the quiet of the medbay, the glow of her pale skin reflecting the soft medical lights, and studied him with those dark, empathic eyes. "The entire ship felt what you did in that corridor," she said softly. "I felt it most of all. The fear, the pain, the decision to stay anyway." She paused. How does a species with no armor, no venom, no claws, how do you do what you do? Elias was quiet for a while. He looked at the ceiling, then at his bandaged hands, then at Vea. "We are not brave because we are not afraid," he said. "We are brave because we are always afraid, and we fight anyway. Fear is not our weakness, it is our fuel. Every human who has ever stood and fought did it with their heart pounding and their hands shaking, and every part of their brain screaming at them to run." He paused. "We just do not listen." Vea held his gaze for a long time. Then she smiled, a warm, gentle expression that carried the weight of genuine understanding. 3 weeks later, the Iron Veil docked at Waystation Oreth 4 for crew rotation. New personnel filed aboard, fresh transfers from across the Coalition, wide-eyed and nervous, carrying their bags through the same massive corridors that Elias had walked through months ago. Among them was a young Sithrani recruit, her scales still bright and unmarked by combat. She checked her assignment on a datapad, and her eyes narrowed when she saw the name on her fireteam roster. Fireteam Korath, she read aloud. Then she hissed with amusement. It says there is a human on this team. A human on a combat fireteam. She turned to the nearest crew member, a scarred Draelkin veteran who was leaning against the wall, watching the new arrivals with quiet, knowing eyes. Is that a mistake? The Sithrani asked. Why would they put a human on a combat team? The Draelkin looked at her. He did not smile. He did not laugh. He simply pushed himself off the wall, shook his head slowly, and said 2 words as he walked away.